She still writes checks? Her granddaughter laughed across the brunch table, loud and proud. Mabel Cunningham, Navy vet and family matriarch, didn't say a word. She'd spent years funding birthdays, braces, and bailouts unthanked. By sundown, Lila's tuition fund would be gone. By Friday, her youngest granddaughter would inherit the trust. They giggled at the pen. Grandma wrote the legacy. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask where you watching from. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The Savannah sun poured through the tall windows of the Peachtree Conservatory Cafe, casting dappled light across white linen tablecloths and bottomless mimosa flutes. Jazz played softly in the background, a curated playlist for an upscale brunch crowd. The host glanced down at the reservation list, then smiled a practiced smile. Cunningham party. Right this way. Mabel followed at the back of the small procession, her cane making a polite click against the polished floor. She wore her best lavender blouse, one she hadn't had reason to pull from the closet in years. Her white curls were set tight, her lipstick precise. A thin gold locket rested just above her collarbonia wedding gift, from a time no one ever asked her about anymore. Lila had already arrived, of course. She sat at the head of the long table surrounded by her curated circle. Two sorority friends from Emory, a tech bro boyfriend with a startup grin, and a stylist named Corday who wore sunglasses indoors. "Grandma," Lila songed when she noticed Mabel approaching, but the greeting barely registered. She didn't stand. She didn't move her bag from the chair beside her. The host pointed politely to the seat at the far end, next to the emergency exit sign and a wilting potted fern. Mabel's smile didn't falter. She nodded and settled in, her chair wobbling slightly against the uneven tile. A waiter appeared. "Water for you, ma'am?" "Please," she said. "No lemon." At the other end of the table, laughter erupted over a story Lila was telling about a brand deal gone wrong, something involving a swimsuit shoot, a drone, and a very angry pelican. The story wasn't funny, but they laughed anyway, loud and performative, as if they'd been coached on how to be heard. Mabel waited for the noise to settle before reaching into her purse. The card was tucked between two embroidered handkerchiefs. She'd taken her time picking eye tone of those thick cardstock types with raised script and a watercolor hummingbird. She'd filled the inside with a short, careful note in her neat handwriting and placed a personal check inside, folded once. She rose slightly and extended her hand. "Happy birthday, darling." Lila took the envelope without breaking eye contact with her phone. She slid one perfectly manicured nail beneath the flap and pulled out the check like it was a scrap of trash. "Oh my God," Lila snorted, holding it up. "She still writes checks?" The table burst out laughing. Mabel didn't. Arthur, sitting beside Miranda, sunglasses tucked into his collar, glanced over his half-full mimosa and offered a half shrug. It's the thought that counts. Miranda reached across him and patted his arm, her diamond bracelet clinking softly. "Maybe next year we Venmo her so she doesn't have to worry about the paper." Mabel folded her napkin with slow, practiced fingers. The air smelled of citrus and champagne and rosewater perfume. She had once hosted luncheons in this very building, when it was still an old bank, before Arthur converted it into what he called a brunchable asset. She remembered standing in what used to be the vault, reviewing blueprints, asking questions no one answered. No one asked her anything now. As a waiter passed with a tray of smoked salmon tartines, Mabel stood and smoothed her skirt. "Oh, Grandma." "Wait," Lila called, realizing something was off. "Don't you want to stay for cake? They're doing gluten-free something. Chocolate." Mabel's voice was steady, almost pleasant. "I'm sure it'll be sweet enough without me." She didn't wait for a reply. As she walked toward the door, she passed a wall covered in mirrored panels. She caught her reflection upright, composed, a woman still standing where they all thought she'd already fallen. Outside, the breeze carried a faint scent of gardenia and salt. She paused for a moment, watching a young couple take selfies beneath the brunch sign. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a slim envelope, the carbon copy of the check she'd given Lila. Slowly, she tore it in half, then again the pieces fluttering like dry leaves into the nearby trash can. Across the street, a black sedan pulled up. Greg Foster leaned against the driver's side door, holding a manila folder. Without looking back, Mabel crossed the street. The air inside Greg Foster's office was cool, quiet, and scented faintly with lemon polish and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, crowded with legal volumes. "Please," she said. "No lemon." At the other end of the table, laughter erupted over a story Lila was telling about a brand deal gone wrong, something involving a swimsuit shoot, a drone, and a very angry pelican. The story wasn't funny, but they laughed anyway, loud and performative, as if they'd been coached on how to be heard. Mabel waited for the noise to settle before reaching into her purse. The card was tucked between two embroidered handkerchiefs. She'd taken her time picking eye tone of those thick cardstock types with raised script and a watercolor hummingbird. She'd filled the inside with a short, careful note in her neat handwriting, and placed a personal check inside, folded once. She rose slightly and extended her hand. "Happy birthday, darling." Lila took the envelope without breaking eye contact with her phone. She slid one perfectly manicured nail beneath the flap and pulled out the check like it was a scrap of trash. "Oh my God!" Lila snorted, holding it up. "She still writes checks?" The table burst out laughing. Mabel didn't. Arthur, sitting beside Miranda, sunglasses tucked into his collar, glanced over his half-full mimosa and offered a half shrug. "It's the thought that counts." Miranda reached across him and patted his arm, her diamond bracelet clinking softly. "Maybe next year we Venmo her so she doesn't have to worry about the paper." Mabel folded her napkin with slow, practiced fingers. The air smelled of citrus and champagne and rosewater perfume. She had once hosted luncheons in this very building, when it was still an old bank, before Arthur converted it into what he called a brunchable asset. She remembered standing in what used to be the vault, reviewing blueprints, asking questions no one answered. No one asked her anything now. As a waiter passed with a tray of smoked salmon tartines, Mabel stood and smoothed her skirt. "Oh, Grandma, wait," Lila called, realizing something was off. "Don't you want to stay for cake? They're doing gluten-free something." "Chocolate." Mabel's voice was steady, almost pleasant. "I'm sure it'll be sweet enough without me." She didn't wait for a reply. As she walked toward the door, she passed a wall covered in mirrored panels. She caught her reflection upright, composed, a woman still standing where they all thought she'd already fallen. Outside, the breeze carried a faint scent of gardenia and salt. She paused for a moment, watching a young couple take selfies beneath the brunch sign. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a slim envelope, the carbon copy of the check she'd given Lila. Slowly, she tore it in half, then again the pieces fluttering like dry leaves into the nearby trash can. Across the street, a black sedan pulled up. Greg Foster leaned against the driver's side door, holding a manila folder. Without looking back, Mabel crossed the street. The air inside Greg Foster's office was cool, quiet, and scented faintly with lemon polish and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, crowded with legal volumes that hadn't been cracked open in years but still gave the place the gravity of decisions made in whispers. Mabel sat in the wingback chair across from Greg's desk, her bag perched neatly in her lap. Her posture was straight, regal, almost. Greg adjusted his reading glasses, squinting at the paper she had handed him. "You're sure?" Her smile was small but certain. "It's time." He leaned back, lips pressed into a line. "You know this is going to stir the hornet's nest." She opened her bag and pulled out a worn leather ledger's frayed, pages annotated in the same neat handwriting she'd used in Lila's birthday card. She flipped it open, careful and deliberate. "They've already built their hive on my porch," she said, tapping a page. "I'm just closing the screen door." Greg exhaled. He wasn't surprised, not really. He'd seen the change start years ago, Arthur growing slicker, Lila growing louder, Miranda smiling smaller. But Mabel had always been the silent fulcrum, the one who kept things steady. If she was moving now, it meant the ground was already shaking. "I'll remove Arthur and Lila as secondary beneficiaries," he said, glancing at his computer. "That leaves only." "Jenna stays," she said, without hesitation. He nodded. "And you want the revocable trust moved to a locked, irrevocable status?" "Yes. Everything formal. Quiet. No announcements." Greg's fingers moved across the keyboard. "And the condo titles?" "Transferred to a holding company. Use the old one, MC Holdings. They won't notice until they need a tax write-off." She watched the lines of code fill the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. "They're already spending what isn't theirs," she said softly. I just don't want them using my name to buy the matches they'll burn me with. Greg turned toward her, hesitating. Mabel, this isn't just a financial cut. It's a message. I know, she said, her eyes meeting his. It's not one I planned to send twice. Dinner that night was at Arthur and Miranda's house, sprawling, cold-edged colonial in midtown Savannah, with a magazine kitchen no one cooked in. Mabel arrived 10 minutes early, as always. She brought a bundt cake she'd baked that morning, wrapped in cellophane with a bow she tied herself. Miranda thanked her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sit," Arthur called, pouring wine into 3 oversized glasses. "We were just talking shop. Got something big in the pipeline, thought you might like to hear it." Mabel eased into the chair at the end of the table, glancing at the oak sideboard. She remembered when it sat in her dining room. Arthur had insisted on taking it for staging. He pulled up a sleek PowerPoint on his tablet and turned it toward her. New condo development, right in the Arts District. Boutique style, 26 units, rooftop access, sustainable everything. We're close, just need to clear a few investment gaps. She sipped her water. Sounds costly. Well, we'd use some of the estate liquidity, roll it through the holding company. Show it as legacy alignment. You know the lingo. She smiled. Do I? Arthur chuckled, missing the shift in her tone. We're thinking big, Mom. Lila even said she might do a few collabs with interior design brands. Name recognition helps. That's why we're keeping the Cunningham tag on it. Miranda passed a salad bowl, her bangles jingling. It's hard to plan, though. We don't know what's where anymore. I mean, you've got so many accounts. Mabel placed her fork gently on the edge of her plate. Not as many as you think. Arthur blinked. Well, we just figured. Pennies now, she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin. But I'm learning to budget. Miranda offered a tight, confused smile. Well, we'll help you with that, of course. Mabel tilted her head, considering her. That's kind. Arthur opened his mouth to press further, but his phone buzzed an alert. He glanced down, then again, slower. Something wrong? She asked sweetly. He didn't answer, just pushed back his chair slightly, staring at the screen. The salad wilted between them. Miranda looked from him to Mabel. I think the accounts are acting up, Arthur muttered. I'll need to check in with Greg. I'm sure he's still working, Mabel replied, rising from her chair. It's not like he gets many family dinners these days. She picked up her bundt cake, untouched on the counter, and walked toward the door. The summer heat clung to the air like damp silk, heavy and inescapable. Savannah's oak trees, draped in Spanish moss, hung over the courtyard like watchful elders. Mabel stood near the iron gate, her gloved hand resting lightly on the rusted post. A poster board near the fountain read, "The Lila Cunningham Foundation, Bridging Futures with Beauty." She smoothed the front of her cream blazer linen, tailored, the same one she wore to Arthur's college graduation. She'd considered something newer, more camera-ready, but everything in the boutiques looked like it belonged on someone trying to be seen. She hadn't come to be seen. She came because she was invited. A photographer drifted past her without acknowledgement, his camera aimed toward the center steps of the Cunningham Arts Hall. It had once been an underused civic building, until Mabel donated the renovation fund in her late husband's name. She remembered writing the check in cursive, pausing after every zero. Lila appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by 2 local influencers and a stylist adjusting the fall of her dress. It was an aggressive pastel pink that clashed with the brick backdrop, but matched her feed's aesthetic. "Gran, hi!" she called, waving without turning her body. "Glad you made it. You can stand back there just while we set up." Mabel nodded. She moved toward the side as instructed, the photographers flowing around her like she was an obstacle to be navigated. Arthur stood at the base of the stairs, directing camera angles with the enthusiasm of a man who thought in marketing decks. "More height, yep, stack Lila center. That's the brand face. Should I come in now?" Mabel asked quietly, stepping closer. He barely glanced her way. "Let's get the core shot first. Sponsors like a certain image." Miranda chimed in from a folding chair, fanning herself with the event brochure. "It's about youth energy. You know how online engagement works." Mabel looked up at the stairs. The marble banister gleamed in the sun. She remembered arguing with the contractor about the price, saying it was too much. He'd told her, "You want this place to last, ma'am. You don't go cheap on the bones." She stayed where she was as the flashes went off, one after another, like a ticking clock made of light. Someone brushed past her carrying bottled water in a silver bucket. Lila posed with one hand on her hip and the other gently resting on the shoulder of a girl she'd met twice. "She still wants in?" someone muttered near the Kaya. "Cameras. We're already way over head count." "She's just watching," another replied, probably proud. Mabel folded her hands and let the words pass through her like mist. After 30 minutes, the group began to disband. Photos taken, content captured, sponsors tagged. Lila approached finally, adjusting her sunglasses. "I think we got some good ones. You'll see them when the magazine piece comes out." "I don't need to be in the magazine," Mabel replied. "Just curious if there's a photo where I'm not behind the fountain." Lila blinked, uncertain whether to laugh or apologize. She chose neither. "We just went for a younger look today. Fresh eyes for the cause, you know." Arthur arrived behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't take it personal, Mom. It's branding. It's not you." "No," Mabel said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not." She turned, heels clicking softly on the flagstone. No one called after her. The parking lot was nearly empty. Her car modest, 10 years old, immaculate sat in the corner like it didn't belong. She opened the door, set her purse inside, then paused. From this angle, she had a perfect view of the staircase, the same marble she had chosen, the same stairs that held her entire family now grinning, posturing, erasing. She reached into her glove compartment and pulled out a small leather photo album. The first page held a picture of Arthur, age 12, holding a ribbon from his first school debate. She'd taken the photo in this same building before it was ever renamed. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed the album. The restaurant was all reclaimed wood and curated imperfection, the kind of place where the napkins were mismatched on purpose and the menu changed weekly. Mabel sat across from Miranda at a bistro table near the back, beneath a chalkboard scrawled with the day's specials in loopy cursive. A young server with a nose ring placed 2 iced teas on the table, along with a mason jar filled with lemon wedges. Miranda smiled politely, but didn't look up from her phone. Her nails, lacquered a pale rose gold, tapped rhythmically on the screen. "I've always liked this place," Miranda said finally, tucking the phone into her purse. "Arthur says it's too rustic, but it feels grounded, real." Mabel stirred her tea slowly. "I remember when grounded meant growing roots, not booking brunch at places with reclaimed barn doors and a waiting list." Miranda laughed, a little too brightly. "Still sharp, I see." The server returned with 2 grilled chicken salads and slipped away with a practiced smile. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the occasional clink of silverware against ceramic. Then Miranda set her fork down. "Mabel," she began carefully, "I think it's time we talk about the future. Yours, specifically." Mabel didn't look up. "Is that so?" "We've been doing what we can to support you, of course," Miranda continued, her voice softening like she was delivering bad news on behalf of a hospital. "But we're not in our 30s anymore either. Retirement's creeping closer for us. Arthur's got the development deal stalling, and with Lila's sponsorships being unpredictable." "You've supported me?" Mabel's tone was even, but her fork paused mid-bite. "That's an interesting rewrite." Miranda's brow furrowed. "I didn't mean." Mabel reached into her purse and pulled out a neatly folded envelope. She slid it across the table, tapping once on the edge before leaning back. Miranda hesitated before opening it. Inside were copies grainy, black and white, but clear enough. Mortgage ledgers, tuition payments, a cashier's check made out to Arthur for his first commercial down payment. Mabel listed them softly, like beads on a rosary. $14,000 for your down payment in '98. $6,300 for Arthur's first semester, when the scholarship fell through. $9,800 for Leela's braces. 3 years of property tax, paid quietly. Because Arthur forgot. Miranda looked down, hands suddenly still. "I'm not asking for it back," Mabel said. "I've never asked for anything back. But don't sit across from me, in a place I paid to renovate, and tell me you've been supporting me." Arthur appeared suddenly, jacket slung over his shoulder, sunglasses propped on his head. He leaned down and kissed Miranda's cheek, then pulled out the 3rd chair. "Hey, Mom. Didn't know you two were already into the heavy talk." Mabel met his eyes. Just finishing it, actually. He grinned. Listen, I've been thinking maybe it's time we consolidate some things, streamline the estate a bit. I've got a guy who could set up a family financial trust, simplify everything, make it efficient. I know some of the stuff's still in your name, but if we transition now... Arthur. Mabel's voice cut clean through the buzz of the lunch crowd. That was years ago. Things change. His smile flickered. Exactly. She reached for her bag and pulled out her wallet. From it, she removed a folded 20 and a crisp 10, setting the M gently on the leather check tray. I'll cover lunch today, she said. Don't want to be a burden. Neither of them reached for the money. Arthur frowned. You don't have to. I know. She stood, straightening her blazer. Miranda looked up at her, uncertain. Mabel, we're family. That's what I used to think, Mabel said quietly. But maybe that too has changed. She walked out into the brightness, the door swinging gently behind her. The clicking stopped. Arthur sat motionless at his office desk, the screen glowing dimly in the mid-morning light. He hovered over the login portal for Mabel's estate account, blinking at the red banner that now stretched across the screen. Access denied. Credentials invalid or revoked. He typed the password again, slower this time. The same password Greg had helped him memorize 5 years ago. Caps, lock off. No typos, still. Denied. He slammed his palm against the desk. From across the room, Miranda glanced up from her tablet. Something wrong with the portfolio? Arthur didn't answer. He yanked open the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila folder full of old documents, trust paperwork, notarized copies, the kind of things he hadn't looked at since Lila's high school graduation party. He rifled through them like they might hold a reset button. Nothing had changed on paper, but something was wrong. I need to call Greg. Miranda set her tablet down slowly. Arthur, what exactly are you trying to access? He ignored her. Greg Foster answered on the 4th ring. Arthur, I just tried logging into the estate portal. Why can't I see the holdings? There was a pause on the other end. Too long. You no longer have access, Greg said evenly. Arthur stood, pacing now. I'm the estate manager. I've had access for what, 8 years? She's updated the trust. You've been removed as secondary custodian. Greg's voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone who'd been bracing for this call all week. You're kidding. I'm not. Arthur pressed his fingers to his forehead. You helped set up that infrastructure. You built the permissions. You can override this. I won't, Greg said. She made her wishes clear. It's legally sound. Very. Arthur's voice dropped. You've known me for 20 years, Greg. You watched my daughter grow up. And I watched your mother build everything you're trying to shovel into a hole, Greg snapped. Don't call this loyalty. It's stewardship. Arthur hung up. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He just moved fast, quiet, unblinking down the hall and up the stairs of the house they'd remodeled to look like a luxury Airbnb. Mabel's old bedroom was now technically a guest suite, but they hadn't changed much. Her 4-poster bed still stood by the window. Her oak dresser still sat beneath the mirror she'd brought from Charleston. Arthur crossed the room and knelt beside the closet, tugging back the old area rug. Gone. The safe was gone. He stared at the floorboards. The dust still held the rectangular outline, like a ghost had left behind its footprint. Miranda stood at the door, hand gripping the frame. Her voice was barely a whisper. Did she move everything? Arthur stood, breathing hard. Apparently. She stepped into the room, scanning the emptiness. Do you think she suspects something? She knows something, he said. She's making sure she dies on her terms. A voice echoed from downstairs. Dad? Arthur and Miranda froze. Lila was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her phone in one hand, a coffee in the other, barefaced and in high-end sweats. I just got a call from the bursar's office, she said. The tuition fund hasn't been renewed. They said I need to provide alternate payment. Arthur moved down the stairs slowly, a man descending into something thick and irreversible. We'll figure it out. Lila followed him into the kitchen. What the hell does that mean? I was counting on that fund. I already told NYU I'd be finishing the certificate. It's not there anymore, Lila. Her jaw dropped. She took it? She took it? But that was supposed to be mine. She's not dead yet, Arthur snapped. Then quieter, darker. But she's acting like it. Miranda watched him from across the island. arms crossed. What are you going to do? Arthur opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and stared at nothing. Then, I'm going to find out where she moved it all, and then I'm going to undo it. The marquee outside the Azalea Street Playhouse read, Cunningham Legacy, a private celebration of purpose. Gold foil letters on a black velvet board. Simple, classy, vague. Arthur stood on the curb, squinting up at it. Press better show, he muttered, tugging his blazer straighter. This kind of thing isn't cheap. Miranda adjusted her earrings in the window's reflection. It has your mother's name on it. They'll come. Behind them, Lila stepped out of the town car with Corday in tow and 2 fingers holding an iced oat milk latte like a prop. Do we know the dress code for this? I went with upscale creative morning just in case. Arthur waved off the sarcasm. Smile. This is image rehab. We need soft lighting and backstory. They walked into the theater foyer together, greeted by a polite usher in a velvet vest who offered them programs black with embossed lettering, tied in twine. No logos, no sponsors, just the title, In Her Words. The theater was half full, already an older crowd, mostly, with the kind of posture that came from church pews and civic boards. A few recognizable faces from City Hall, a former school principal, a real estate columnist. Arthur scanned the room, suddenly uneasy. No brand reps, no step-and-repeat banner, no cameras staged up front. Lila leaned in. Where's the media team? I thought this was going to be a launch, Arthur muttered. For the foundation. The house lights dimmed. The velvet curtain parted. A single spotlight fell on the stage. And then, from the darkness, a woman stepped forward. Not Mabel, but a presenter in a navy pantsuit holding a folder. Good evening, she said. Thank you for joining us for this one-time tributian evening, celebrating the life and legacy of Mabel Lorraine Cunningham. A veteran, a businesswoman, a builder of quiet empires. Arthur sat up straight. Wait, what? Slides began to project behind the speaker. Mabel in uniform U.S. Navy, 1968. Mabel in a hard hat groundbreaking for Cunningham Properties, 1979. Mabel on the cover of Southern Women in Real Estate, 1993. The audience clapped politely. Lila leaned toward Miranda, her voice a stunned whisper. When did she do all this? Miranda didn't answer. More images came. Mabel speaking at a zoning board meeting, cutting a ribbon with the mayor, standing in a muddy lot with a young Arthur holding blueprints he barely looked at. The presenter continued, smooth and sure. Over 4 decades, Mabel Cunningham developed more than 20 properties, started 3 grant-based housing initiatives, and sponsored the city's first scholarship for women in trade schools. Arthur was pale now. His jaw twitched. And in 2022, she quietly endowed the Savannah Resilience Fund under a pseudonym providing no-interest business loans to over 60 women-owned companies in Chatham County. Applause again. Real, warm applause. A few attendees stood for it. Cameras were flashing now, but not from news outlets. Locals, residents, former colleagues. Every photo caught Mabel mid-laugh, mid-smile, mid-memory. The next slide. Mabel and Etta Monroe, shovels in hand, breaking ground on what would become a memorial garden. Lila turned to her father. This changes things. Arthur didn't answer. He was sweating. The final video clip showed Mabel speaking at a podium in a church basement. Legacy isn't what they write in your obituary. It's what people build on your name after you're no longer there to explain yourself. When the lights rose, the crowd gave a full standing ovation. And from stage right, Mabel stepped into view. Not frail, not diminished, sharp-eyed, poised, a quiet queen in slate gray. She waved once, modestly. A flashbulb lit up the left side of her face. She turned into it and smiled. Every shot captured her as they never had before alone. Elevated, unmistakably central. Arthur remained seated, hands clenched around his program. Lila stood reluctantly, clapping half-heartedly. Miranda just watched. From backstage, Greg emerged and joined Mabel at the edge of the curtain. He handed her a single white rose and said something into her ear. She nodded once. The cemetery path curved gently beneath the low-hanging branches of crepe myrtles, their pink blossoms scattered like confetti along the gravel walk. Mabel walked slowly, her cane tapping a steady rhythm beside her. On her right, Etta Monroe kept pace with the fluid shuffle of someone who had long since made peace with arthritis. On Mabel's left, Jenna skipped ahead, her lavender backpack bouncing with each hop. "Not too fast, baby," Mabel called gently. "We're not racing the dead." Jenna giggled and slowed, falling into step between the two women. "I'm just trying to keep the ghosts from catching me." Etta chuckled. "If any ghosts linger here, they'd have good manners. This is old Savannah. Even the spirits wear Sunday shoes." The three of them turned down a quiet row lined with century-old stones, the air thick with honeysuckle and something older earth, maybe. Time. Mabel paused before a modest headstone bearing the name Henry L. Cunningham. 1933, 1992. She placed a hand on it, not for support, but something more private. Jenna went quiet beside her, sensing the weight of the moment. "This was your grandpa," Mabel said. "He built with his hands, didn't leave much money behind, but he left me a blueprint." Jenna looked up. "Did he teach you how to write checks?" Mabel blinked, then laughed, the sound bright and sudden. "No, honey. That came later. But he taught me to count slow and give fast." Jenna reached into her backpack and pulled out a notebook. On the cover, doodles, stickers, a tiny sticker of a glittering piggy bank. "Can I have a checkbook when I'm older?" Mabel smiled at her, really looked at her. The child had Arthur's chin and Miranda's pale eyes, but something else, too. Something untethered. "Of course," Mabel said, "but I hope you use it better than the rest of them ever did." That afternoon, Greg Foster sat across from Mabel in his study. The same stack of estate files now opened wide like a priest's hymnal before confession. "You understand this won't sit quietly," Greg said, pushing a revised page across the desk. "Arthur will lose his mind. And Lila? She'll go live." "I'm not worried about their volume," Mabel replied, signing in deliberate strokes. "Noise isn't the same as power." She turned the page, ink already drying. Greg glanced at the clause again. "Beneficiary, primary, Jenna Rose Cunningham, age 10. No custodial rights assigned to Arthur or Miranda Cunningham. This means every dime in the legacy fund goes through a generation they can't touch." Mabel looked up. "That's the point. I'm not leaving wealth. I'm planting intention." Greg leaned back. "They'll try to reverse it, contest the trust, call it mental duress. Hell, they may drag in experts to question your capacity." She reached into her purse and retrieved a folded piece of paper. "Then let them fight shadows." Greg opened it. It was a photo. Mabel, Jenna, and Etta from just a few hours ago. The three of them beneath Henry's tree, a picnic blanket spread between the headstones, laughter frozen in still life. Mabel added, "They spent so long betting on my death, they never realized I was busy living." Greg slid the document into a secure folder, then locked the drawer. "You built the walls," he said. "And now you've locked the door." She nodded once, resolute. That night, Jenna sat on her twin bed, a pink lamp casting soft light on her math homework. A checkbook, Mabel's old one, empty now but filled with scribbles, rested beside her elbow. She was practicing signatures. From the hallway, Arthur watched her in silence. Something sharp flickered in his expression, resentment, maybe, or fear. He turned before she saw him. Lila hit post without reading it back. She sat cross-legged on her California king bed, ring light glowing, 3 phones balanced across a wireless charger like weapons waiting to reload. Her thumbnail was chipped. The oat milk latte on the nightstand had gone cold hours ago. The caption she'd just sent to her 138,000 followers read, "Toxic old money ruins more than trust. Funsit ruins trust. Betrayal hurts more when it wears pearls and pretends to smile. Some people die decades before their funeral. I'm done pretending." The accompanying photo was a filtered shot of her staring out a rain-speckled window, makeup flawless, tears strategically smudged. Within seconds, the comments began. "Wait, what happened? You're the victim here, Ma. Stay strong, Queen. Are you talking about your grandma? Rich girl problems. Boo-hoo. Your inheritance isn't hitting fast enough." She clicked through them, deleting the nastier ones, but they came faster than she could swipe. The algorithm, as always, loved chaos. By noon, 3 of her brand partners had emailed her manager to pause content strategy. A well-known skincare company removed her from their homepage. The damage was spiraling, public and personal, with all the cruelty of the very spotlight she'd spent years chasing. Arthur burst into her room without knocking. "What the hell did you do?" Lila looked up, startled. "You saw it?" "Saw it?" he barked. "Everyone's seen it. Do you have any idea how this makes the family look?" Lila grabbed her phone, defensive. "I was being honest. She's been freezing us out. She pulled the tuition fund. She made you look like a brat," he snapped. "And now you've confirmed it." Lila's lip trembled. "It's not fair," Arthur paced. "That doesn't matter. Perception is all that counts. Sponsors are pulling out because you decided to pick a fight with your 76-year-old grandmother in public." From the hallway, Miranda called softly, "She's on the line." Arthur turned. "Who?" "Greg Foster." He stormed down the hall, grabbing the landline off the counter like it had insulted him personally. "You've got to fix this," Arthur said without preamble. "She's made changes that are aggressive, undermining the family structure." Greg's voice came cool and flat through the receiver. "That structure was built on her money. I'd hardly call her reclaiming it an act of aggression." Miranda stepped beside Arthur, trying to sound calm. "Greg, hypothetically, could this trust be contested? I mean, if we had reason to believe she was being pressured, or you want to challenge a legally airtight document created by a woman of sound mind, using a third-party notary, video witnessed with timestamps, and verified by 2 independent advisors," Greg said, his voice now edged with the faintest disdain. "Be my guest, if you like losing in court." Miranda opened her mouth, then closed it. Arthur slammed the phone down. In her sunroom, Mabel sat in an armchair by the window, steam curling up from a porcelain teacup in her lap. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, a splash of milk. The iPad beside her buzzed softly with notifications. She ignored them. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, gilding the furniture with a soft golden hue. A cardinal landed on the garden fence, then flitted away. She sipped her tea. Etta entered from the side door with a basket of fresh tomatoes. "Your granddaughter's internet's on fire," she said without looking up. "I'm not surprised." Etta plucked a mint leaf from the windowsill planter and dropped it in Mabel's empty glass. "She'll blame you." Mabel smiled. "She already did." Etta raised an eyebrow. "Do you regret it?" Mabel looked out at the garden, where Jenna's bike was tipped over near the bird bath. The training wheels had been removed that morning. "Not even a little," she said. Across town, Lila sat curled in her closet, the lights off, a laptop balanced on her knees. Her video editor opened on the screen, frame paused at a freeze of her face mid-tear. She clicked the playback button and watched herself speak. "I just wanted to feel chosen. I thought legacy meant being loved, not locked out." She hesitated, then pressed delete. The silence in Greg Foster's office wasn't just quiet, it was surgical. The kind of quiet reserved for last testaments and open secrets. Greg closed the final folder with a heavy hand, then slid it to the center of the desk without speaking. The thick paper bore Mabel's signature at the top, dated 5 years earlier. Below it, an addendum typed in clean professional legalese, but the handwriting beneath wasn't hers. Across from him, Arthur sat stiffly in a leather chair, his hands folded too tightly in his lap. "You really thought this wouldn't surface?" Greg said at last, voice low and grave. "That a document used to authorize a $140,000 draw from her estate line wouldn't eventually come under review?" Arthur's eyes stayed on the folder. "It was an emergency." "You forged her initials," Greg said. "That's not an emergency. That's a felony." Arthur stood up too quickly, then paced toward the window, rubbing the back of his neck. "It was for the Riverbend deal. We were weeks from losing the lot. The bank needed soft money on file, and Christ, I was going to put it back." Greg didn't look up. "But you didn't." The weight of it hung in the air. "I was going to," Arthur said again, his voice cracking now. "I had every intention." Greg leaned back in his chair. Intentions don't show up in audits. Behind them, the antique clock ticked loudly, like a verdict. "I'm not pressing charges," Mabel's voice came from the doorway. Arthur turned. She was framed in the doorway, backlit by the stained glass from the outer hallway. She didn't look angry, just older than she had in weeks. Her hands were steady, her face unreadable. "You're not?" Arthur asked, blinking. "No," she said. "I don't want you in court. I don't want you in jail." A beat passed. Greg started to say something but caught her look and remained silent. Arthur took a breath. "Then, what do you want?" "I want you out." She walked into the room, placed her purse gently on the chair beside Greg, and sat. "Out of the trust, out of the holding companies, out of the legal structures you've been shadowing for years like a fox around the henhouse." Arthur stepped forward, desperate now. "You can't just—" "I can. I already did." His mouth opened, but no words came. "I found the ledger last week," she continued. "I wasn't even looking, but there it was, your handwriting. My name, signed like it was borrowed, like you knew I wouldn't check." Arthur dropped into the chair across from her, hands now trembling. "You were supposed to leave it to me." She didn't blink. "I left you chances." He looked up, eyes glassy. "I left you time. I left you trust. And you spent them like they were loose change in someone else's pocket." Greg stood quietly and excused himself, leaving the two of them in the office. Arthur leaned forward. "I'm your son." Mabel folded her hands. "And that's the only thing you've never had to earn. The only thing I can't take away. But I won't let you weaponize it anymore." He covered his face with both hands, shaking now. The truth of it landed harder than he expected. She wasn't just closing a door, she was breaking it up behind her. Mabel stood, slow but resolute. "I'll send a revised ledger by week's end," she said. "Your names will be gone from everything but the history." She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Arthur didn't follow. She paused before exiting and looked back, not cruel, not triumphant, just done. The ballroom at the Bonaventure Club glittered like a snow globe chandeliers swaying gently. Overhead, crystal flutes clinking, laughter echoing off polished marble. Waiters in black tuxedos moved like stagehands, slipping through the crowd with silver trays and tight smiles. At the center of it all stood the night's crown jewel, a silent auction wall lined with easels, each showcasing architectural renderings for the expansion of the Savannah Children's Arts and Wellness Center. 5 new wings, 5 potential donors, 5 naming rights up for bid. No one knew who the anonymous bidder for the 6th wing was. Not yet. Arthur stood beside the charcuterie table, sipping a bourbon he wasn't enjoying. His tuxedo itched, and his cufflinks didn't match. Across the ballroom, Lila posed for a photo near the floral installation, adjusting the fall of her silk gown like it mattered more than anything else tonight. Miranda hovered by the sponsor board, eyes scanning the crowd. She hadn't spoken much since Greg's final call the week before. "Any updates?" Arthur asked, approaching her. Miranda shook her head. "No one's talking. They're saying the final bid came in just before the deadline, anonymously, through a private LLC. Arthur narrowed his eyes. "Let me guess it wasn't one of us." Just then, the hostaman with slick hair and a Savannah drawl so thick it sounded vintage tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your incredible generosity tonight. We've just closed bidding on the final naming opportunity. The Maine Education and Resilience Wing, a space for vocational programs, after-school mentoring, and financial literacy." Arthur crossed his arms. "Here we go." The host smiled. "The winning bidder has asked to remain anonymous until the signage is unveiled." With a grand gesture, he nodded toward a velvet curtain hung at the far end of the ballroom. The fabric dropped. The crowd gasped. The Jenna Rose Cunningham Center for Resilience. Endowed by M.L. Cunningham Foundation. The text gleamed in brass letters. A render of the building shimmered beside it. Soft curves, wide stairwells, art rooms, classrooms, and a quote carved above the main entrance. "Teach a child to sign her name, and she won't wait for permission." Lila's voice cracked first, raw and loud. "She humiliated us!" Guests turned. Arthur's mouth fell open. His bourbon trembled slightly in his glass. "She named it after Jenna?" Lila hissed. "She skipped me entirely. After everything I've done?" Miranda looked at the sign quietly, her lips parted but silent. "She never even told us she was coming tonight," Lila fumed. "She's not even here." But she was. At the back of the room, near the exit where the light was softest, Mabel stood in a charcoal shawl and navy gown, a delicate silver pin clipped near her collar. Etta stood beside her, holding a folded program and a secret smile. Mabel didn't wave. She didn't speak. but she saw them. Arthur turned slowly to face her across the ballroom, the distance between them gaping. "She doesn't want us," he muttered. Miranda looked over at him. "She's telling the world without raising her voice." Mabel turned toward the exit. Guests stepped back politely to let her through, some nodding, others too stunned to react. As she passed a row of young volunteers holding clipboards and donation receipts, one of them looked up and whispered, "That's her. That's the Cunningham." Outside, the air had cooled. The sky above Savannah was dark velvet, pinpricked with stars. Greg was waiting by the car. "She made a scene," he said lightly. Mabel raised an eyebrow. "Number they made a scene. I just made a donation." He opened the door for her. "I assume this will escalate things," Greg said. Mabel smoothed her skirt before stepping in. "If they think this was about money, they're still watching the wrong curtain." Rain tapped softly against the windows of Mabel's study, the kind that fell without apology but also without drama. The room was warm with lamplight, quiet save for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft sigh of old floorboards settling into themselves. At her desk, Mabel unscrewed the cap of a black ink pen. The checkbook lay open in front of her, the cover worn, the pages fewer than she remembered. Her handwriting had changed slightly over the year slower now, but still neat, still hers. She didn't hesitate. "Pay to the order of the Jenna Rose Cunningham Education Trust. Amount, $250,000. Memo, for a future she'll shape, not inherit." She signed her name carefully. Full, no initials, no shorthand, just Mabel Lorraine Cunningham in confident cursive. Greg sat in the armchair nearby, a briefcase resting against his leg, file tabs peeking out like flags on a battlefield. "Everything else is finalized," he said. "The properties, the legacy fund, the business shares. You'll retain lifetime discretionary power. Jenna gets the rest, incrementally, through a third-party trustee." Mabel nodded. "Make sure Etta gets visitation access to the books." Greg smiled. "She already has the login." Mabel folded the check, slid it into a linen envelope, sealed it with wax, and pressed her ring gently into the soft red. She let it sit on her desk. She wasn't sending it. She was leaving it. Across town, Arthur stood at the kitchen island, his phone vibrating on the marble counter like a wasp trapped in glass. He picked it up and read the email's subject line twice before clicking. "Notice. Final estate account closure effective immediately." A single sentence followed. "Your access has been terminated per Trust Modification Order number 984B. Arthur's knuckles went white around the phone. He didn't speak. Miranda sat nearby with a glass of wine, watching him. "Is it done?" He nodded. "No more accounts?" He didn't nod again, but he didn't need to. She stared down at her glass and whispered, "We really lost her." Lila went live at 8:41 p.m., framed by candlelight and faux vulnerability. Her followers had dipped, but her engagement still surged when drama cracked the surface. "I won't say names," she began, brushing a hair from her face. "But you can love someone and still call out their behavior. You can be grateful and still be wounded." Comments flooded in. She pretended not to read them. "You don't get to decide who becomes your legacy," she continued. "You don't get to erase people just because they don't fit your final story." She didn't cry, but her voice quivered. Across her screen, hearts floated up in a steady, stream-pink, red bleeding. She smiled faintly, then ended the stream without a goodbye. 10 minutes later, her inbox lit up with 4 messages, all from brands, all using the same phrase. "We're stepping back from public affiliation at this time." She threw the phone across the room. It hit the closet door and landed face down on the carpet. Back in Mabel's study, the wax seal had cooled. She picked up the envelope, held it for a moment, and then opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside was a small wooden box with brass hinges. She placed the envelope beside another item already waiting there. The check she had written for Lila's birthday, the one torn in half. Years ago, she'd meant to throw it away. She hadn't. She never would. Mabel lifted the envelope from that day, still faintly smelling of perfume and rose powder, and placed it gently atop the final check. 2 generations, 2 pages, one kept, one never cashed. She closed the box and locked it. From the window, the rain had softened. A few breaks in the clouds revealed the faintest trace of moonlight. She poured herself a small glass of scotch and sat back, legs crossed, gaze resting on nothing in particular. She didn't need to say it aloud. It was done. The knock came just after 6. Mabel didn't answer right away. She stood in the hallway, back straight, one hand resting on the edge of the console table where Henry's watch still sat wound every Sunday out of habit, not necessity. The second knock was softer. She opened the door. Lila stood on the porch, hair pulled back, no lashes, no liner. Just a navy cardigan over a t-shirt that read "Breathe Through It" and jeans that hadn't been torn on purpose. Her phone wasn't in sight. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Mabel stepped aside. "Good thing you remembered where I live." The door shut behind them with a sound that felt louder than it was. They sat at the kitchen tablano candlelight. No curated playlists, just a chipped pitcher of water and 2 empty glasses between them. Lila picked at a stray thread on her sleeve. "I didn't know you were all this," she said finally. "The military, the businesses, the real estate. I Googled you after the gala." Mabel tilted her head. "I figured you'd only Google yourself." Lila flinched, then nodded. "Fair." Mabel sighed and poured them each a glass. "You didn't know, because you never asked." Silence stretched between them. Not angry, now just brittle. Lila's eyes welled. I thought you just didn't like me." Mabel didn't flinch. "You've confused silence for disdain your whole life. I kept quiet because every time I opened my mouth, someone handed me a filter. You, Arthur, your mother. This family doesn't ask questions, it makes assumptions." Lila took a sip of water, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to be." "You meant to be adored," Mabel cut in. "Not understood." That landed harder than either of them expected. Lila looked down at her lap. The tears came then, quickly. Not performative, not framed for a lens. Real. "I didn't know how to be anything else," she whispered. Mabel stood. "Are you hungry?" Lila blinked. "What?" "I cooked. You came in during dinner hour. That's still how this works." She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Lila followed like a child, too fragile to resist. They ate at the table simple roast chicken, asparagus, biscuits that weren't warm anymore but still tasted like care. Lila barely touched hers. "I watched that video you deleted," Mabel said. "The one where you said you just wanted to be chosen." Lila froze. "I get it," Mabel continued. "You wanted to be picked. But honey, that's not how legacy works. It's not an award. It's a weight. And you have to want the burden and the bruises." Lila wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I wanted the name to mean something," she said. Mabel nodded. "So did I. That's why I had to take it back first." For a moment, the room held something fragile and mutual in understanding that hadn't existed an hour before. Not resolution, but maybe the draft of a rewrite. Lila stood slowly. "I should go." Mabel didn't argue, just walked her to the door. At the threshold, Lila turned. "Are we okay?" Mabel paused, then answered honestly. "We're closer to real than we've ever been. That's more important than okay." Lila nodded, stepped onto the porch, and disappeared into the warm night without another word. Minutes later, Greg knocked brisk, professional, already holding a black folder. "I didn't know I was walking in behind a truce," he said as she let him in. "It wasn't a truce," Mabel replied. "It was a draft, with red ink." They sat at the kitchen table again. Greg opened the folder and began to lay out documents. "These are the final ones. Jenna's Education Trust has cleared the IRS gate. The asset transfers have posted. All that remains is your personal sign-off." Mabel picked up her pen. He watched her carefully. "Any part of you want to change anything?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the empty chair across from her, the one Lila had just left. Then she signed. The front page of the Savannah Ledger landed on doorsteps like a reckoning. The woman behind the wall. How Mabel Cunningham rewrote a Southern legacy. Byline: Nora LeClaire, Senior Features Editor. Below the headline was a photograph Mabel hadn't posed for a candid, snapped at the ribbon cutting of the Jenna Rose Cunningham Center for Resilience. She stood in profile, laughing mid-sentence, eyes closed, sunlight splintering through her silver hair. The article was 12 paragraphs and 3 decades deep. It told of her Navy years, her first property flip, The scholarship fund no one knew she'd established under an alias. It traced the contours of a woman who had been invisible to the public but pivotal to the city. It named the fund she built, the trust she established, the granddaughter she chose. It also included a single quote from Mabel. Sometimes, the only way to leave something behind is to build something they can't tear down. Arthur read it 3 times. Then he threw the paper across the kitchen. "She's painting herself like a damn saint," he growled. "This is a hit job. A media setup." Miranda looked up from the breakfast bar. "They didn't mention you." "That's the point," he snapped. "She's erasing me." He grabbed his phone, scrolling with clipped urgency. "I'm calling Donnelly. There's grounds for a defamation suit here. Emotional distress, misrepresentation of familial structure, something." Miranda stood quietly and walked out of the room. Arthur's attorney declined the case. "We'd be laughed out of court," Donnelly said, voice flat. "You'd be suing your mother over a story about her own life. You're not even mentioned. No damages. No grounds." Arthur stared at his phone long after the call ended. No one was coming to fix it. Later that week, Miranda sat across from him at the dinner table, divorce papers in front of her. Her voice was calm, not cruel. "You haven't looked at me since she cut you off," she said. "Not really." Arthur stared down at the signature line. "You were building off her name," Miranda continued. "Now that it's gone, I don't think you know what to build anymore." He didn't stop her when she left. Mabel's memoir dropped quietly, no fanfare, no book tour, just a black and white cover and a title printed in serif font. The Unedited Woman, Essays on Earning the Quiet. Proceeds were pledged entirely to the Resilient Women Fund grants for female entrepreneurs starting over at any age. Jenna's name appeared beneath the foreword. "My grandmother didn't give me everything. She gave me exactly what I needed. A blueprint and a blank page. What I build next will be mine, but her fingerprints will be in the foundation." It became a bestseller within the week. Readers underlined passages. Book clubs debated her choices. City council members cited her when proposing education initiatives. And in a small home office in Brooklyn, Lila clicked donate on the fund's website. 5 figures, anonymous. She didn't tell anyone, not even herself. Mabel sat on the porch with Greg and Etta, the afternoon sun dappling across her shawl. The book rested on her lap, dog-eared and loved, the way books should be. "They're calling it your second coming," Greg said, sipping iced tea. One headline read, "Savannah's Silent Queen Finally Speaks." Mabel snorted. If they'd listened years ago, they wouldn't need subtitles now. Etta cackled. Mabel looked out toward the garden, where Jenna was helping replant the herb box. "She's learning to shape what's hers," Mabel said. "Not just inherit what's mine." Greg leaned back in his chair. "That's what legacy actually means," she nodded slowly. "A name doesn't mean anything unless the next person earns it." A car pulled into the drive. Mabel didn't need to turn to know who it was. The paint was still drying on the baseboards when Mabel walked in that morning, slow and steady, cane in one hand and scissors in the other. Not ceremonial scissors, real ones. Office grade, slightly dulled. Honest. The front door of the new community center opened onto what had once been a shuttered post office, gray and forgotten, surrounded by cracked pavement and overgrown hedges. Now it gleamed in soft sage green, with a copper plaque fixed beside the door. The Legacy Room, founded by the Mabel L. Cunningham Trust, for women who start again. Inside, the walls were lined with photo frames each. One simple, black-edged, no captions, just faces, some laughing, some proud, some mid-cry, mid-sweat, mid-rebuilding. Mechanics, bookkeepers, gardeners, women who had filed for business licenses after surviving the unspoken. Mabel walked past them slowly, eyes landing on each. She had mentored every one of them, quietly. Some in person, some through grants, some just by listening. In the center of the room stood a long walnut tablino cloth, no centerpiece. Around it were folding chairs pulled in from every corner, already scuffed with anticipation. Jenna stood near the doorway in a pale yellow dress, the scissors now in her hands. Her hair was pulled back with bobby pins and optimism. Mabel stepped back beside Greg and Etta. "You ready, sugar?" she asked. Jenna nodded. "Do I say something?" "You already are," Mabel said. Jenna stepped forward, held the ribbon tight, and with a quick snip, split it clean down the middle. The crowd, small, local, intentional, applauded. A nearby teacher hugged her partner. One of the women from the photo wall wiped her eyes. Outside the building, parked just beyond the last row of cars, Arthur sat in his black sedan, engine running. The window was down halfway. He could see everything. Jenna, Mabel, the plaque, the people cheering. But no one saw him. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, as if that might anchor him to something he still understood. But the applause didn't stop. It rose and expanded, not for him, not anymore. In the distance, a pair of kids ran past the car, laughing, their sneakers kicking up dust. He didn't move. Inside, Greg leaned toward Mabel, adjusting his tie. "You changed the narrative," he said quietly. Mabel smiled, small but certain. "Number, I just wrote it myself." Etta slid a clipboard into her bag and handed Jenna a packet of welcome letters to give out. "They start arriving next week. The first cohort. We've got 15 women coming through the door before September." Jenna looked over the names. "I'm supposed to help them?" "You're supposed to learn beside them," Mabel said. "That's how real leadership works. You don't give people ladders. You teach them how to build scaffolding." Jenna nodded. Then she glanced at the door. "Is Dad coming?" Greg paused. Mabel answered without looking. "Not today." Out in the parking lot, Arthur finally turned the key in the ignition. But he didn't drive off. He sat for a while longer, watching a building he didn't help raise, watching a legacy that no longer bore his fingerprints. And from inside, Mabel watched him too, just once, through the front window. She didn't wave. She didn't flinch. She simply turned back toward her namesake, the girl with her own key now. The sidewalk still held the warmth of the afternoon as Mabel walked to the corner bank, the one with the ivy curling around its columns like it had something to whisper. Her cane tapped against the concrete in measured rhythm, and under her arm she carried her old leather checkbook, creased, worn, held together by quiet defiance. Inside, the teller greeted her by name. She nodded in return but didn't pause. This wasn't a transaction. This was punctuation. She sat at one of the waiting desks near the window, withdrew a blank check, and opened her pen. Not a stylus, not a phone, a pen. The same pen Arthur once mocked, the same one she used to sign off on every chapter they'd never bothered to read. She filled it out deliberately. Pay to the order of Mabel Lorraine Cunningham. Amount, $0. Memo. For remembering it all. She smiled at it, then laughed. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a self-inking red stamp, and pressed it against the paper. Void. Across town, they were probably still circling their silence like vultures. Arthur stewing in the husk of a business he never built. Lila folding gratitude into PR-friendly contrition. Miranda drifting toward a life no longer tethered to legacy. But none of that mattered here. This was hers. She folded the check, walked to the lobby's bulletin wall where blank deposit, slips lived and framed announcements were pinned, and slipped the paper into her purse's side pocket. Outside, the air was cooling. Summer had begun its slow retreat. Jenna was already waiting on the porch when Mabel returned, barefoot, legs curled under her, a composition notebook open in her lap, a pencil tucked behind her ear. "You went to the bank?" Jenna asked. "I took a walk," Mabel answered. Jenna tilted her head. "They still don't get it, do they?" Mabel unlocked the front door but didn't open it. "They never opened the envelope," she said. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a weathered slip of linen, paper-creased, worn thin, the flap still bearing the faint stain of old perfume and something older still, disappointment. The check envelope, the one from Lila's birthday brunch, years ago. She held it out. Jenna took it gently, turning it over in her hands, her brows furrowed. "Why keep it?" Mabel smiled. "Because it wasn't for her. Not really." Jenna slipped the envelope into her notebook like a pressed flower. "I think I get it now," she said softly. Mabel opened the door and stepped inside. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and paper. On the far wall, she placed the voided check inside a square brass frame, just above the light switch. She straightened it once, stepped back, then nodded. Behind her, Jenna whispered, "That's a weird thing to frame." Mabel didn't turn around. "Is it?" "No," Jenna said after a moment. "Not at all." They stood together in the hallway, generations apart and suddenly aligned. The air between them felt less like inheritance and more like intention. Mabel walked toward the living room, where Etta had left the lamp on, and the record player waited with its arm raised like a question. The day had one breath left in it. She looked down at her pen, still uncapped in her hand. She capped it slowly, and whispered just for herself. They giggled at the pen. She turned to Jenna and smiled. "I wrote the legacy."